with trouble in schools than zero-tolerance discipline.
We have a different bond with our teachers, so it's not like we look at them as teachers, we more look at them like friends because they help us with our personal needs and our school needs.
Now, in India, Eid this week was marked by violence between Hindus and Muslims in the northern city of Jodhpur. Police used batons to break up the fighting and nearly 100 people were arrested. Ramadan as a whole has been marked by trouble between Hindus and India's Muslim minority. There were around a dozen incidents in 8 different states in April. Dr. Mukulika Banerjee is a social anthropologist at the London School of Economics with long experience of rural India, and I asked her how she interpreted recent events.
Well, what has been happening are these encounters between Hindus and Muslims on Hindu festival days in India. There have been a series of different religious festivals like Ram Navami, like Hanuman Jayanti, and processions have been taken out on the occasion of these festivals. But these processions have then been used to orchestrate sort of rituals of humiliation of Muslim communities. These processions are almost entirely peopled by young men. They stop outside mosques and call out insults and ridicule the Muslim community, provoking them, really.
Well, you use the word orchestration. Who's doing the orchestrating?
The reason I use the word orchestration is there's nothing spontaneous about this, right? These are young men who indulge in violence, who are armed with swords and flags. So, not at all the way you would go on a religious procession. They then are completely left to their devices. The police either looks away or sometimes even joins in. So the state, the police, and later the courts the next day are seen to be entirely complicit.
Well, I suppose the question that is raised by what you've just said is to what extent is the governing party, the BJP, involved in all this?
Well, one has to understand that the BJP is a subscriber of religious political ideology of Hindutva that wants to see India not as a secular, diverse country, but a Hindu nation. And a Hindu nation in which all either minority communities need to exist as second-class citizens.
And to be clear, you have absolutely no doubt in your mind that all the blame rests on one side. I mean, I think you're a Hindu yourself, but you no doubt that the blame rests among some elements on the Hindu side.
There is so much scholarship on this. This is what one would call a pogrom anywhere else. A riot is when there are clashes between two religious communities. A pogrom is when all the institutions of the state look the other way and kind of implicitly and explicitly facilitate the violence that comes from one side. This is not about Hinduism as a religion. This is about Hindutva, political ideology that is about majoritarianism, about the supremacy of Hindu populations directing their desire to control the political agenda towards other religious minorities.
There have been stories of this kind coming out of India for a very long time, but you get a sense in some of the reporting of recent events that there's a sense that this might be a different order of things, that we could be on the verge of something really very, very serious. What's your instinct?
Yes, indeed. I think those of us who study India are extremely worried because this is the first time that the national government is led by a political party like the BJP, backed by a grassroots organization like the RSS, whose political ideology is to convert India into a Hindu nation. And exactly the institutions that should be controlling and stopping the violence are precisely where people are complicit, like I said, with the police and the judiciary.
All right, let me turn to Satish Sharma, who's a Hindu author and philosopher, and Sheikh Ibrahim Mogra, who's an imam in Leicester and is of Gujarati Indian heritage. Satish Sharma, what do you make of the interpretation you've just heard?
I was quite surprised listening to what Dr. Banerjee was reeling off. And there are a couple of points that she mentioned which I find very difficult to reconcile with the reality of what happened. Somehow she seems to have suggested that during Hindu processions, they managed to orchestrate a deluge of stones to descend upon themselves from houses. Stones don't manifest without preparation, and no group in a religious procession would be arranging in advance to be pelted with stones. And that has been a feature of pretty much all of the Hindu celebrations and processions across the countries, from Kolkata right the way across now to New Delhi and other places as well. And then for her to generalize and paint those people who were clearly the victims of violence as somehow being responsible for their own victim status, it just beggars belief. As for the remainder of the remarks, it was like listening to a litany of tropes that have been circulated for a long period of time against the Hindus of India, and it's the trope of choice by those who would want to denigrate a democratically elected government with a huge majority elected on 2 occasions.
Well, we'll give Dr. Banerjee a chance to respond to all that in a moment, but let me bring in Ibrahim Mogra. Lots of families of Indian heritage in this country, of course, have still close connections with India itself. How concerned do you find your fellow Muslims in this country are at the moment?
Yeah, we are extremely concerned. This is our ancestral home. We have still very strong family connections, relations. I have aunties, uncles, nephews, cousins, and the list goes on. And there are so many of us, particularly here in Leicester, who have very deep connections with India. We're very proud of our Indian heritage and deeply disturbed by the violence and the anti-Muslim propaganda that we see. May I add that I appreciate Dr. Banerjee's analysis, and I say I would agree with her. And I would invite Satish to consider that the Muslim processions at Eid time, they were not carrying swords, they were not carrying guns. And if there is an issue of stone pelting, I think the perpetrators need to be identified. It is wrong to do that, and the police should step in. It's inevitable that both of our communities will be impacted by what goes on in our home countries. And it's critically important that we ensure that we do not import that hatred and that violence into our country. We have to live together. As a Muslim, I am prepared to speak out against any crime perpetrated by Muslims against any group. And I think if that is reciprocated, we can show and demonstrate our solidarity.
Satish Sharma, what's your view on that question, on relations between the communities in this country and the possibility that they may be damaged by what's happening in India itself?
Well, India has seen many turbulent events, and they do cast a shadow over here. That's undoubtedly true. But equally, the communities in this country, I think we have been here long enough to understand each other. And there are some aspects of us which are probably worth reinforcing and mentioning. The Hindu community is known for this practice of ahimsa, not just preaching non-violence, but practicing it. And I can't see any change appearing on the horizon which would cause the Hindu communities to abandon that most valuable identifier which defines it, which is non-violence.
Dr. Banerjee, coming back to you, what do you make of what you just heard?
Well, it's very interesting having this conversation in Britain, where you are talking to people who belong to minority communities, and one can have this kind of conversation about rights, about protections, about respect, because there is a certain guarantee of democratic freedoms and human rights in the country that one lives in. We should hold India to its own democratic credentials and ask exactly the same questions. Can we talk about minority rights in India? Can we talk about justice being done to people who perpetrate violence? Can we ask questions of why people go on religious processions armed with swords and guns? Can we ask why the Prime Minister does not condemn violence against minority communities? These are the questions we would ask in any democracy. So why do we not treat India with the same respect when we think about democratic rights?
Mukulika Banerjee, ending that discussion with Satish Sharma and Sheikh Ibrahim Mogra. The vivid and distressing news reports coming out of